And good afternoon, everyone, and happy 2021 to you from everyone here at the Idiopathic Radiculopathy Consortium. And that would be Bob Schmidt, that would be Erica Holscher, and me, Tina Brock, your host for Into the Absurd. As we head into a whole new year, just many thanks for joining us today. If you're coming in Zoom, and if you're coming in on Facebook Live, we hope you'll join the conversation this afternoon as we talk with producer Sonya Aronowitz. And I want to just extend a quick thank you to everyone who has been here with us since June, helping us to make Into the Absurd thrive and grow. And we're heading into 2021 with some really interesting folks from the community around the country and around the world. And we do so appreciate you being here. On today's show, Sonya Aronowitz. Sonya is a producer of independent creative theatrical journeys, and she is the founder and the executive producer of Juniper Productions. And Sonya and I got to know each other probably most likely as producers in town. And we thought it right and proper that we start 2021 off with a conversation about her journey as an artist, as a creator, and what it means to be a producer in Philadelphia and around the country. So Sonya Aronowitz, welcome to Into the Absurd.
Hi, Tina. It's great to see you, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you. I think this is a right proper way to start off 2021. Sonya, we've had so many conversations over the last couple of years, knowing each other about what it means to produce, what is involved in producing. But I'm also very interested, and I'm sure our audience is in as well, in your journey and starting out in Manchester and the road that you took to get to the place where you make the decisions about Juniper and the projects that you work in, and as importantly, your work as an artist. So if we could start back with your childhood back in Manchester. And I read, I loved this, that you had written, that Manchester had a very active local theater community. Your father was an actor and a singer, your mother a professional pianist. And I wondered what life was like for you to grow up in that environment.
Okay, so yes, just so you know, I have a special place in the heart for the north of England because I actually was born in Newcastle, which is sort of way up at the very end of what was the Roman Empire. So I was born up in Newcastle, right up in the north. And I think when I was very young, the family moved to Manchester. And I look back, at this journey that I've taken. And, at one level, we kind of stumbled into things, and we'll get to that. We'll get to how I stumbled into producing theater specifically in Philadelphia. But I think what was so important and vital to my growth culturally and artistically was that I grew up in a very musical household. And that was the primary love, that was the primary language. I actually think for me, a lot of the input that I receive is through music. My output might be in a different artistic form of expression, but I grew up with my mother teaching piano and hearing the sounds of Chopin, at night and going to sleep with that. And, she and I were just talking the other day and talking about those very, very early influences. And I remember her reading The Hobbit to me, and Norse, a Norse mythology. And so that was the sort of imaginative world that I entered. So I really think sort of the primary artistic form, which I find the most spiritual, point of entry, is through music. And then, I look back and try to understand when I first developed my passion, my love for theater, and because music was always there in the household. And I think it was a more gradual coming to theater, growing up in Manchester and in a very strong Jewish community. I actually had what we called elocution lessons. And, this was to just make sure we spoke proper, and at the same time that we also learned Shakespeare and, you know, took examinations in that. And at the time there was a lot of theater going on in school. I remember like one, I would say, also actually looking back, I also think about how exciting it was, say, to go to pantomime. And one of the things that I think about a lot as a producer is theater as popular culture, you know, and we could talk a lot about that and a lot about England. But I think that sort of artistic and entertainment fusion, you know, beginning with those early outings to the Christmas pantomime was also, I just remember that excitement about going to theater. And so the theatrical, you know, began without learning just Shakespeare is just, you know, growing up in England, it's just Shakespeare has always existed. And so I remember a moment though when I was 11 and they were casting for the school pantomime, and it was Jack and the Beanstalk, and it was between me and a boy for the principal role of Jack. And the teacher literally told me that I didn't get it on account of the fact I was a girl. Now, a couple of interesting things happened at that point. I think I was very upset. I was given a prologue, but there was also a moment when the boy who was cast in the principal role did such a fantastic job. I was able to stand back at that point and actually, you know, said, you know, I don't know if I could have done as well as him. So from there, the
Let me ask you
theatrical,
a quick
yes,
question.
yeah, yeah,
So they're casting for Jack,
yes,
right? And they
yes,
let you audition,
yeah,
but then they tell you you don't get it because you're not a boy. Like they didn't know
right.
that ahead of time, or what?
Well, I think the really interesting thing, well, it's a few interesting things going on there, but one of them, I think, is that typically the principal role of Jack is played by a girl in, you know, British pantomime. It's always that. I mean, what fascinates me is that whole, you know, the cross gender, you know, and all of that going on. So I think it wasn't the moment where I said, okay, I was able to sort of live with it, have that disappointment, but also somehow I was able to stand back and say, but I think he did really well in that role. So there's been a process for me of theater becoming is like a sacred temple in many ways for me. You know, it taught maybe a little bit about how I think of myself as wanting to bring theater, you know, to the people, and it being very much more of a popular culture. And there's an element of evangelism in that. So I think I've been able also to have this sense of service and to be able to step back as much as I step in. So, you know, I have had plays produced, you know, in theater in Philadelphia and so on. But there's always a moment when I'm really questioning and interrogating myself. Is this the way you're going to serve your purpose? Is this your specific gift? And so that was a lot of what was, I think even in that moment, I was able to step back and say,
Mhm.
but he's got it, you know, this boy has got it.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on the reasoning on her
Oh,
reasoning, but
yes.
we'll just move on from that. Um, um, did your family, did your mother and father recognize in you this creative soul, and did they nurture that? Did they, I mean, I think people are always so fortunate to be in families where their parents recognize that in them early and can just help that to flourish. And I wonder if that was your experience or.
Yeah. I think it's two separate things. I think that I definitely grew up in a cultural household. You know, there was music all the time. And at one point, I was a drama critic with my dad for the local newspaper. And that was like just an amazing experience to go with him.
You
But
were a kid drama critic?
I was not a kid. I was in high school at that point.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, sort of a, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you
But
were a
it was,
high school drama critic.
yeah, yeah,
So
yes.
how'd you do that? How did you do that? You just like go to see a show and then you'd feed in with them on that, or how did that work?
Oh, with my dad, you mean? Would they
When
do?
you said you were a drama critic with him,
Yes.
I'm fascinated by how that process, like, worked.
Well, it's very interesting because my dad grew up very working class and just pulled himself up by the brilliance of his intellect and grit and determination. So that, we were much more middle class. And I just remember it being the moment where I wrote the actual review, and I would share it with him, and he would cross things out and say, oh, this is a better word. And I just remember the power of the moment when I wrote a review and he didn't touch it. He said, that's fine.
So did you have the byline?
Yes, I did have the byline. I think we shared it. I think sometimes he would write the review. I don't think he ever showed it to me though, to give my comments back to him. But it was, yeah.
That's really interesting, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. And it was also like, I suppose if I look at my parents, I think, the time with my dad, I see as that time in the theater and at football, because we can't not talk about football. As growing up in Manchester, that was also a religious experience. And music
How
was, I
so?
felt, was much um
Well, let's
well,
back, because you did say, I think you, maybe it was in a conversation we
yeah,
had where
yeah,
you said that there were 4 things that really
saved my life. Yeah,
saved your life,
yeah,
which is a lot. Theater, football, right, music, and disco, particularly,
yeah, disco
and
definitely.
religion, right?
Yeah,
And how,
Judaism, yeah.
if you can briefly sort of touch on each one of those and how they impacted you.
Yeah, I sort of, I think everything goes back originally to music. And I think what happened growing up is that, again, at that sort of age of 11, when I started a new school, I was very much an outsider. And I just didn't find my footing. I lost my best friend. The culture in Manchester, and it was an all-girls school, and really girls just really paired off, and there was a very physical expression of it. I mean, literally, girls would literally link arms and say, "This is my friend," and I was very, very. I think what it was just incredibly lonely, and I think music saved me in the sense that I played the cello. I had a fantastic time in a local orchestra. We toured Europe. I had friends through that. Um, I think theatre, and I say specifically the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester, because I'd like to just take a pause and just talk about how um, I'm trying to think of the right word. I mean, to me, that is like a temple of theatre, in Manchester. It's the largest theatre in the round in the world, I believe. It's 800 seats. I remember the day that it opened, and it was on the former cotton exchange. Manchester is this, of course, has a very interesting history with cotton, and it was like a spaceship. It was suspended, and magic, it was like magic was just created there. There were just so many performances that are completely indelible, for me. And
Mhm.
then, just to touch on football, I
Well,
mean,
wait,
I don't know
go
if you
back
want to
for one
talk about
second.
theater or
No, I
football.
definitely want to get to football, but I want
Yeah,
to go back to this touring Europe and the cello part.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So was that an amateur group? Was
Oh,
that that's fascinating. And just if you can speak a little bit to that.
sure. I mean, we had a local youth orchestra,
Mhm.
so the small town, and actually, my dad was in education, worked professionally in education, and there was a Berry Youth Orchestra,
Ah.
and so we had a twin town in France, we had a twin town in Germany, and just sort of really again, I sort of, for me, there's a big connection between the spirit and music. So again, sort of countering this terrible loneliness and isolation I felt, I would say between the ages of 12 and especially that 12, 13, 14 age, where had no friends. So Monday to Friday was really hard, but on the weekends there was music and, you know, other cultural events. So,
So
and
these were people
football, we
outs
have to talk about football.
okay. I definitely want to talk about football. But I'm fascinated with the because I think so many people feel that. Or I mean, so many women I know or young girls know that's a thing where a time. That's a time, right? So you would perform or you would find solace in performing with the cello. And did none of the folks in the child orchestra, were they not a part of the school, or this is kind of a separate a separate
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can look back and say what happened was in that particular school, we stayed in the same class. So, you know, once you had those friendships, you had the same class for the whole day. And that was for 3 years. Things got a bit better
yeah.
when,
Hmm.
you know, things were mixed, you know,
Did you
mixed.
ever think about following the love of the cello and working more as a musician?
Again, it's me understanding what my special gifts are, and I'm become very, very self-aware about what my, you know, it's a sense of service. I have loved playing the cello. There's nothing better. I think my mother's actually staying up in the UK to watch this, and playing with my mother and playing with my daughter. And you know, I just wanted to acknowledge there's actually musical genius in the family, and I don't think, and brilliance that has manifested itself. Actually, you know, one of the relatives is a pop star, you know, so there's a public manifestation, but there's nothing in the world that gives me more joy than seeing the transmission of that specific gift across the generations. When my mother and my daughter, you know, play a duet together, I'm kind of the missing link there. I'm less gifted than they are, but, you know, I'm very musical, but it was never ever going to be a career choice. Yeah.
So you knew that when you were playing and you were
Yeah.
younger, you sussed out that that wasn't going to be the road.
Yeah, and I think, and it plays into why I sort of crossed off playwright at a certain point in how I was connected to theater, is that you're in the room and you're literally with, and I'm just saying, well, actually, there's a friend of mine who was in the youth orchestra, and he now lives in DC, and he was just much more talented than I was. You know, you reach a point where you say, how am I going to use my time in this world? You know, what gifts am I bringing? What can I see? You know, what can I see as a creative person that perhaps
Yeah.
other people can't see, and that I want to make happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty profound that you were asking that question of
Uh,
yourself at
yeah.
that age.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I do think some of what happens is, and for me as an adult, you know, is that you maybe what you were trained in or what you went through school with, you come out of and you see, and then that may lead itself to understanding. But you were pretty young then, so to be able to say to yourself, "Hey, I'm good at this, but
I'm not that good.
I'm not that good,"
You know,
and
and
to
yeah.
not and I wonder if that's like, are you ever concerned that because you certainly have a wonderful resume filled with a lot of different, which will definitely get you, and we're getting to football too. But do you ever wonder that you short circuit yourself before you give something a chance to, or do you think you
No,
intuitively understand?
no, because I think what I recognize is really my gift, is able to connect different forms that haven't existed before. So I can infusion. You know, want to talk about this not just being a really sort of potentially revolutionary time in how we think about producing, but how we think about fusing different elements. So, like, you know, I have an ear. You know, I have an ear for the music. But my output might, so where I think my artistic gift is actually in poetry and lyrical writing and sort of memoir. So, but there's, but I can create a soundscape. So I can, my first original instinct and impulse is to go there, and then I know enough about building more and more and more layers on top of that, and finding other creative voices, but in different genres that speak to me. So I also, I didn't like practicing, whereas I love the craft. I think if you have to love the craft of what, if you're going to choose an artistic
Well,
discipline.
don't you have to love
Yes.
practicing too?
Pardon?
Don't you have to love practicing too?
Right. So yes.
I mean, you better, right?
Yes.
Or maybe I guess not. I guess that's true of anything. Like,
Yeah.
but I do think musically, right? A common theme for people that play is that you really have to throw yourself into the, you know, I mean, I think that's true of acting as well. Like a lot of people like rehearsing, some not so much. You know what I mean? Not so much, but I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I was also thinking of another point that you made. So how did you get to the point where you decided that the poetic is the gift?
Well, it's very easy because the market speaks, you know. I may be the most successful poet you'll ever meet, because from a market point of view, every poem I've written and I've submitted is being published. Now, we're only talking about 5 poems, but you know, I think, and it wasn't like I was submitting to the Paris Review or anything like that, but I think it's me understanding what the, as I was talking about music being the input, in like my native, you know, voice is very poetic, and I've sort of learned that in terms of my own stage writing, I have to adapt a lot from that. Like I'm a very good monologue writer, you know, because of that poetic voice.
But when you say the market speaks, right, that's certainly one way that we can all measure box
Mm-hmm.
office success or just
Right.
whatever. And I think that's certainly an outer directed way of
Mm-hmm.
understanding, hey, somebody's paying attention to what I'm doing. But internally, was there something about writing poetically, creatively inside of you that was different than what was happening when you were playing the cello? Like, do you know if there's an internal marker where you were like, I just feel this more intensely, or I just feel more connected with everything, or I feel like it's a clarity that I'm bringing to the table on this? Did that have did that figure into your thinking? Because
Yeah.
I'll tell you where I'm going with this, Sonya, because what I'm really fascinated is about, and we have to get to football, but we're also got to get to, is the sort of shifts and changes that you've made as a producer to try to be flexible and to pivot, but also I'm interested in the internal landscape of what those changes have meant, you know? So that's why I'm asking about, is there something about writing poetically? And we'll, you know, obviously we want to get to the work, movies I have not seen, which is it's a novel, correct?
It's a memoir. It's a memoir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But is there something you can pinpoint that's like, I'm super alive when I'm doing this, whereas when I was playing the cello, I was doing my laundry list or whatever? I mean, is there?
I think it's what I hinted at earlier, in that I love the craft of working with words. That's what it comes down to, more than I like the craft of practicing a musical instrument. So I get a high of playing with words and mixing them and hearing the sound, music, you know, the music of the words and the lyricism, and just putting one type of word up against another, and just fusing things, you know, fusing the spirit of different words together.
And did you feel that when you were playwriting? Because you spent a number of years, did you not, in like a playwriting group connected with Passage, right? Up in Trenton, Passage Theater up in Trenton?
Correct, yes.
And is that where you met Jessica Bedford, right? That whose play Splinter and Crack?
Correct. Yeah, Jessica, there were some other great playwrights in that group, including Jackie Goldfinger. And again, we go back, and other playwrights I hold in very high esteem were in that group, Ian August and David Lee White. And yeah, so it was, again, and I was able to stand back and say, you know, there are voices in this room that I think are really compelling. And I just started that process of why yeah, what's special and exciting? I'm not sure if I can write characters as well as they can. I'm not sure if that's my interest, but I'm really excited about this play or how it might be with an audience, things like that I
Mhm.
started to think about.
So that time during that playwriting group, which was it, what, a decade maybe, or not that long? You were
Yeah.
able to test out that part of what of, that facility with language and combining of words
Yeah,
and
yeah. Now, we're going to get to James Joyce. So I will just, if you don't mind, just mention the fact that, again, because James Joyce has really taught me to read and to write and to see as an artist. And one thing that I learned from playwriting was that I wrote a short play. In the very last paragraph, there was a monologue, because I like doing monologues. Um, at the end of the play, and the whole class, and I think it was at play planning, says, "Oh, this sounds so familiar, like this is just like the end of the James Joyce story The Dead, where the snow is falling." And I was going, "Oh really? Yeah, it's just like that, it's just like that." So I ended up reading it, and and then that sort of was one of the areas where, by just following my natural impulse, I found my sort of creative parents. I do
so
that.
something you had written,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
was familiar or
Right,
had
right.
the gestalt of The End of the Dead, and
Correct.
people were commenting on that.
Yeah, people, yeah, just said this is just because it was, there's this beautiful passage to do with snow, and I scanned it, and it was just like I was channeling Joyce. It was really, really interesting.
So is that a good thing? That
Ye- ye-
did you, so that was your connection at that point, is like, I can be influenced by the great poets and writers of our time. I feel an affiliation with this poet. Because I know, yes, yes. Is that what you were thinking?
No, I think it's about how we're searching for our creative parents, and sometimes, because I wouldn't necessarily seen that in Joyce just reading it cold, but it was just, I think there's a lot of what the work that I'm doing artistically now is finding in my own family. There's a huge creative genius, which is just artistic genius that is sometimes buried and sometimes manifested. I am related to some quite well-known people, and so there's that part. It's about, again, in Joyce language, the memoir I'm writing is it's a portrait of the artist as a young woman growing up in Manchester. So it's like I'm searching for my creative family, and who I am as an artist in that work.
This is the memoirs that you're writing
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
the
yeah.
movies that I have not seen.
Okay, yeah.
Which I definitely, we're getting to football too. What is it about, Joyce? I think it's obvious to many people what it is about Joyce, but I think to each person it's very individual. We generally have these conversations where I'm talking about Beckett and you're talking about Joyce, and then we end up talking about Beckett and Joyce together. And is it that he just speaks very deeply to who you are?
No, no. I think it's about this finding a creative parent, which I found originally by being me, by my natural, non-adaptive, creative voice. Um, but I think I just kind of mentioned it very briefly earlier, is that James Joyce, has taught me how to read, how how to write, and there are other writers actually, but how to read, how to write, but most importantly, how to see. Because, yeah, how to observe the world. And I think it's that power of observation and that power of sight, and to see things that people don't see, that aren't necessarily visible, that are really, really, really buried deep.
So
That it,
it's the
yeah,
technical aspects of his work that really, I'm looking for the
yes,
thing in reading his work
right.
that, so he was instructive to you. When you say creative parent, do you mean that, oh, I can learn how from him how to write language that is observant, or do you through him, because he's observant, do you see
So
the world differently?
I think before I read Ulysses, and a shout out, I think Robert Berry might be on this call, who was instructor. I just took a Ulysses class with Robert Berry through the Rosenbach, and that's been another lifesaver in the pandemic. So I think that what I learned from Joyce is not an instruction. It's not like this is how you write a great book like Ulysses. What many things and many layers that really go right to the heart of what it is to be an artist. And I think one of the things that really moves me very much with Joyce is that he's brilliant, you know, brilliant. There's this surface, there's this sort of this style. It's like Mozartian, you know, he just plays with language, he writes lists, you know, there's all this craziness on the top. And I think in the class, one of the hardest chapters was this one that was like, the style was just like, you know, he mimics different styles. But what you learn from Joyce, it's like, if you have to listen and you have to go beneath style to see what's actually happening. And in this case, you know, at one level, it's a father who doesn't have a son and a son who needs a father. And so there's this element of movement that all those layers you can find. But also with Joyce, I think what I align very much with is that he makes the profane sacred. You know, we are following this 37, 38, late 30s Jewish-ish type guy stumbling around Dublin. I mean, he does pop in on a birth, he does go to a funeral, he does a tiny bit of work, he sells an ad, and he sort of keeps himself busy. He's lost his key because his wife, that has a sexless marriage, is going to be having sex at 4 o'clock with another man. And, you know, and then there's also this movement towards this father and son relationship. It's not, you know, I'm not giving any spoilers away by talking about Ulysses at this level, but I think it's the fusion of all culture, like popular culture and high culture and religion. And it, again, coming back a lot of times to making the profane sacred. And I think that's how I see my life a lot of the time, with my deep romance with life, but also understanding the spiritual path that we have, and as artists too. So, yeah.
So there's a couple questions here. Let's see. So Robert is passing kudos to you, Sonya, that you've rather elegantly explained the Hamlet theory, my glasses, in Ulysses that everyone has such a hard time with.
I did.
So good. Yeah, that was well worth it. So a question here. Have you ever read Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka's manifesto, The Revolutionary Theater Liberator?
No.
Published in The Liberator, the 5th of July, 1965.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we get to football. So let's get to football.
No, actually, football is no longer as interesting as James Joyce or theater, or maybe producing Philadelphia. The note I'd like to share about football is that was the first career I really wanted to have. Like, you know, if I couldn't actually be a player on the field, which was pretty obvious, I wanted to be a referee. I love the community. Like, there's a lot going to be in movies I have not seen about growing up female in a town like Manchester, which is a huge footballing town. And, you know, I'm writing the hardest chapter and writing the loveliest chapter simultaneously, so I don't get caught in either one. And, you know, there's this great disco time in Manchester. And, you know, that's where a sort of girl like me could be asked to dance by a Manchester City footballer, you know, and it was just so sweet. And so football is a religion, and it's very tribal in Manchester. and I will write about it more in the memoir, but just it was really important, and time with my dad, and it was so exciting, and it was dramatic, and I was either listening to Shakespeare on the radio or football games, you know, and the audio experience, but the community of men and the working class men, and my dad would suddenly, he could slip into any accent. It was a bit slippery that way, and he would put on his working class accent, and I would also do the same. So it was a really amazing experience.
Also, but you said prior, right? It was a working class background, right? So
My dad grew
he
up
had
yeah, my dad grew up working class.
other accents? Like, was
Yeah,
there
well, he was
like
fluent. Yeah, he was fluent in 7 languages. I think 7. Mum's on call; she might correct me. So he had a great ear. You know, I think I've inherited the ear for language from my
So
dad.
do you think that like, as I'm thinking, as you're talking about growing up in Manchester, I'm thinking about growing up in the Midwest, and how certain sports are just germane to what it's like to be a Midwesterner, and how those sports are defined largely by, you know, whether it's football or baseball or whatever, those are the kind of, that's the culture. And if you're in the band front, or you're in the whatever part of the play you are in to support all of that, do you think that there was something unique about being in Manchester and having it be soccer? I mean,
Yeah.
the fact is, these towns and communities, whether they're right in the United States, in England, they become religion, and those
Absolutely.
those guys are and
Yeah,
women.
well, yeah, it was tribal, because in Manchester you had the Reds and the Blues. You have Manchester United and Manchester City. A whole other story that we supported neither of those teams, and a small, tiny team, and my heart is absolutely broken, because this team, which, you know, had a fine history, was one of the first football clubs. It's called Bury, was died like a couple of years ago.
When you say died, you mean
It went into
like kaput?
administration, yes, and I was absolutely heartbroken, because, you know, I was one of those football hooligans. You know, I was that passionate. I invaded the pitch, you know, after a game when, you know, my little tiny team was going to be playing Liverpool, and that's huge. I mean, that is drama, and that is working class drama, and, you know, that is, and the community of people, and it, you know, it's just a very exciting experience for me to feel part of something. And maybe what I'm trying to get to is like, eventually, is like feeling part of that community, you know, your tribe.
Sure. Yeah.
In a
Yeah.
way.
Don't you
Yeah.
think that is a wonderful thing that athletics do for us, though? Whether you're in your little league team or you're in your high school team, they give you a sense of place and community, and just, I mean, that's why we're such diehard sports. I think the crossover between sports and theater, and the way the audience is so integral to that experience, is really,
Yeah.
really important. Um, a question. What other creative parents or influences do you possess, do you think, Sonya?
Well, I have many. And in the course of writing the book, I found more of them. So, in addition to James Joyce, there is Sting. And again, I found Sting by, otherwise known as Gordon Sumner, by writing. The book is in 18 episodes, as in Ulysses is in 18 episodes. So, because poetry is my natural medium, the way I naturally express myself, I wrote a poem for the time of my birth, which was in Newcastle. Now, Sting was in the environment, was actually at my birth, you could say. And after I
Oh,
wrote,
wait, go back.
so not technically at the birth, he, okay, he had nothing
When you put
technically
a
to do.
frame around it and say, you could say, I'm
No,
like, no, don't you go saying
no, I'm not his love
buying
child
it.
or anything like that. Well, kind of, maybe.
Well,
You know,
okay, so
well,
explain.
actually, I need to step back 1 second, because apart from, we'll get back to Sting, but one more thing about James Joyce is that my grandmother, this is my mother's mother, was born on March 1905, which is 9 months after Bloomsday is set. So I'm, just so you know, I look again at that sort of creative parenting. So I found my way to Sting because his lyrics absolutely mirrored what I wrote in the opening poem, and specifically the song Fragile. And I think when you're born in a certain environment, and then you're talking about Newcastle, even though consciously I wasn't there, you're in a rainy environment. There are fortresses and walls at the end of the empire. And you don't see the sun, and the sun is angry to you, and there can be angry stars. And and the prologue of the book, and each one will have a movie title, is North by Northwest. So, you know, I'm like, so again, it was like I was channeling Sting, and then found his song Fragile, which when it becomes translated, the memoir will become translated for theater, and I've already got the vision for all the different settings for the movie as well. Yeah.
So are you doing like a genealogy on the creative parents part? Like, so how is a sort of in your mind when you think about your creative family or your
Yeah.
creative parents? This is a really interesting concept to me. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
have you done like a creative parents, creative family tree and like put James Joyce up there and then like Sting
I,
and then
yeah, I have. I have actually done the whole cast, including the creative parents, for, you know, the memoir that will become part of the performance and part of the movie. Because I think all this source material can come to the world in different ways.
Mhm.
So, but I actually have very creative, real family members, and I have some very notorious family members as well. So the artistic journey is learning that. The Joyce connection keeps going through my own memoir because of the number of blooms. So my grandmother was born Violet Moss. So again, you know, you have the, you know, the poetic imagination can run with that, with Bloomsday, and, you know, is Moss. I can give you what happens to the word moss. The name Moss is that Moskowitz is Harold Pinter's mother's name. And through my Aunt Betty, I'm related to Harold Pinter. So there is a Moskowitz connection there. And then I found another creative parent only yesterday, in Mike Leigh, the British director who is also the first cousin of my dad's very closest friend. So and who was also influenced by Harold, you know, Harold Pinter. And I went deep down into Abigail's party and just discovered that his Leopold Bloom type character is Lawrence Moss. So I'm like, you know, making those creative connections as well. Yeah.
Right. So you're uncovering some really interesting connections in your own family and
Yeah.
following those. How then do you tie that back? I mean, it's a little like finding your roots, going, you know, certainly important to know who your ancestors were that you came from. Do you find, how do you decide if in your world or more literally in the work that you're doing, those creative family members or parents find a home? Is it that you have to be like aligned with them and then they sort of uh,
Um,
have a place in the tree, or is it more just go into
um, yeah, I mean, when I talk about these it's not necessarily that there's going to be a whole episode on, say, well, there will be a Harold Pinter episode.
yeah. I mean, I'm thinking
Yeah,
more just of Sonya the artist or Sonya
right.
the
Yeah,
producer.
right.
I mean, is this part of a larger sort of seeking of ancestry
Yes,
that is useful to
yes.
your
Yeah.
understanding who
Of,
you
of,
are?
because I think we have to come with a sense of a self. I mean, that my story is worth telling, and that I'm shaping this as my artistic journey. I think one thing that, like, one of the big discoveries is the one grandparent who'd passed away before I was actually born is my mother's father. And I'm so actually very, very sad that I never got to meet him, because the music was all there, you know, musical, the whole family, they had a band between the family, and he was an entrepreneur, and he built a car business, you know, beginning in 1925, and the general strike and the depression, and he was a racing car driver, but he was cultured, and you know, I've been in touch with a cousin, and my grandparents' romance is central in the 1920s, is so key to, and the germane to this work that I'm thinking about, and this grandfather that I unfortunately didn't meet. And like thinking, you know, maybe if I'd been born a boy, I might, you know, have had it might have been more visible. But I do think that in his entrepreneurial creativity as much as his musical, and just that sounds like he was just a lovely person. And yeah, we've uncovered the love letters that he wrote to my grandmother, and you know, my grandmother, none of the grandchildren could ever see her as this sweet thing of love and light that my grandfather was writing to from Paris. And so I've always been drawn to that 1920s period, because I think that their romance took place there. So
yeah, there's a lot to love about that time period.
yeah.
It certainly is a let me go. I've got a bunch of questions here for you, Sonya.
Yeah.
I'm curious about yeah, a couple of people asking the same question. Will this memoir be adapted for the stage? And if so, who would play you?
That is the best question, because I'm ruminating right now. There are two thoughts going through it. Because one thing that Joyce did again was just completely break the mold of the hero's journey, and who was worthy of telling it. And because you've got this guy stumbling through Dublin, just as I've been stumbling through different places in my life. So there is a thought that I would like somebody who is almost the complete opposite of me. I have certain ideas of who that might be while I'm in the audience, so that there could be a breaking down of the fourth wall, because I think it would help embrace the mythology and the university, you know the word I'm trying to say. Yes, of the journey that I've taken, if it's somebody who doesn't look like me. So that's one thought.
When you say completely different, you mean
Yes.
doesn't look like you and or is temperament?
I'm talking about potentially, why not, you know, a Black drag queen. I really think about, what does that mean? Does that mean you're not looking at the clothes of the person, but you're seeing, this is a journey of the soul that we take as artists, and the spirit. So does that mean if that person has, that means that the storytelling and the myth of the journey, because it's not even an actress who would look like me. So I'm thinking about that a lot. There's a little bit of a performer in me as well. So I think about that. But again, as I come back and say, but Sonya, you've got much more to do to serve this community as a producer. And do you really want to perform this yourself? Like, is that your calling?
Have you performed as an actor before?
Just, at school, in very minor roles. I don't think I'm that gifted as an actor. I think that, I do me really well. And I also did a very good impression of Margaret Thatcher when I was at school.
Can we see that?
Okay. Dennis, why didn't they give me the role on The Crown? I don't know, Dennis. How's that?
That was fabulous, Sonya.
There you go.
I didn't really think you would do it, so kudos to you. Like, no, that's nothing like putting you on the spot, right?
No, but I've got a little piece, but that was like a little bit of my performer. But I just think I got to go back to, what are my gifts, we haven't really talked about my producing work, and my producing comes out of a sense of service to artists and audiences. And, you know, so that is my calling as much as my journey is as an artist is a calling, and where things have to fuse for me, you know, in my life is really important.
So
Yeah.
how do you do that? I mean, you know, I think right, we've talked about that before. That's an
Yeah.
interesting challenge, is
Yeah.
to, when does the performer and the artist come come forward, and when is it important to step back? When do you merge the two? There's many certainly benefits, right, from sitting in that crow's nest and being able to look down on things, um, in multi-pronged ways. You know, we've talked about that before. Are you feeling at this point like you're producing, because you speak a lot about and passionately about feeling like you can really serve the community
Yeah.
as a producer?
I do. It's very much a calling for me. And I think especially right now, because I think, again, let's look at the term fusion. I think I'm an independent creative producer. And I think there's a lot of myths about what a producer does, thanks to Max Bialystock and, you know, Broadway. And I think it's time, like in Philadelphia, that we really look and say, what can an independent producer do who understands how to fuse things, how to bring this incredible talent that we have in this city to make it a more popular culture, you know,
Mhm.
popular
I
art
mean,
form.
you
And,
know, I
you
mean,
know,
some of the, whether it's Broadway or off Broadway or, you know, wherever you're doing it, some of
right, right,
those Max Bialystock parts of it are basically what you do, right?
correct. Gotta find the money.
You find the money, and you find the ways and means, to bring it, you know, to bring it to the table. When you say independent, is there something specific in the language of independent creative producer that you think of? Why did you choose that language to sort of identify your special
I I I
place?
th- I think it's been a process. So it's I started Juniper when I stumbled into a distillery. I was actually going to be going out and writing more memoir work around the world and traveling and writing about gin and life.
About
And
gin?
yeah,
Mhm.
you know, culturally and the history. The history is just very interesting. We like writing about cotton around the world. You know, it's something we enjoy. But anyway, I was going to be traveling, taking some time for my own writing, and I just thought, well, just why not go to Philadelphia and the distillery? And I walked in there. I thought, what if we brought some plays to the people in this place? And that's what started all the
Yeah,
producing
no,
journey.
those were some really fun,
Yeah,
fun combinations of form and function and celebration and energy in the same. Um, isn't it the big question this last year? Is it like all of that, not just meeting in places, but gathering, and all of that has had to reset.
hmm
You've We talked a little bit about sort of translating some things virtually, or thinking about a hybrid platform. Is that a direction that you think you're going for?
absolutely. I think there are some benefits to this platform we're in now that are going to carry over in a permanent way. So, as a producer, what really interests me is how we can, you know, call them hybrid events. Just look at, you know, one thing project I have in development is a audio theatrical podcast that will ask members of the community to bring us objects of memorabilia from the year 2020, put it in a time capsule, and we're going to be launching a series of episodes based on future historians, you know, doing a bit of pop culture and looking back 100 years from now and saying, oh, what's this and what does it mean, and having all types of fun with it. And but then that would then lead to a small, and it could just have to be a promenade type installation of the objects, so that we can build an audience through these episodic theatrical, episodic events, audio podcasts. But I think ultimately the goal is, however we're going to manage it, and it could be 22 before this particular Juniper project is fully realized, that there has to lead, we all want to, gather, and even if it's in small forms. And also the project I'm extremely excited about in development will be a live streamed event where we hope, just depending on what's going on in the world, that we can have a live audience. I'm working with the magnificent Joylette Harris and Tamara Anderson, and also Amina Robinson, who you may know from her Barrymore Awards. And we're developing a show for Joylette that is really the story of her soul, her life through the music of Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight and Ella Fitzgerald. And I couldn't ask for an incredible creative team. And it's like, these people actually live 10 minutes from me in Philadelphia. It's like their name should be up in lights, if they were in New York. So I'm the lucky producer here who say, okay, I'm going to get the nuts and bolts part of my brain out, and how we're going to do it, and how we're going to build funding for, all those sort of producerly type things. But at the same time, what's really exciting for me, and you ask about being a creative producer, is now I think I'm realizing that I have a creative voice in the project. And I think I've only just learned that actually through doing my own work, and to take this more integrated approach where I let everybody else do what they do really well, but I'm still somebody who feels I can have some creative input into the work.
Yeah, I think that's key, like at the level that, not level, but in the place in which, you have different magnitude, right? You're working on Broadway, or you're working on Off-Broadway, or you're working in Philly, wherever you're working, it's still, the names are always in lights for the people that are sitting in the audience. They're always, and we are fortunate to live in a city where projects can happen, and where there are so many tremendously talented people that, and for the people who live here to be able, for me as an audience member, to be able to go out and see really wonderful work is, I want to just get back, and we're running real short, but I do maybe want to close on this point. There's so much more to talk about. You say, and you talked about it first with Joyce, but then referred to it again, the stumbling around part, the stumbling around and making. Do you think that is a part of, do you feel that when you're doing it in the project?
In which project?
In any project, I mean, creatively. I mean, you sort of alluded to, that's what I'm doing. I'm stumbling around. And I think we all feel that to some degree when no one goes to school for producing, right? So you come out and you start making projects and you work more and you do this. But does it feel that way when you're going through it?
I think I'm embracing a whole new way of producing, and that this year has told me to sit still and to listen very, very deeply. I mean, go back to Joyce. If you have to really listen and see what's going beneath, what's really happening beneath all the layers. So this year, we've shut down all the distractions I've had, and it's been very hard because I'm just a little bit extroverted, to sit home and just listen. And I think it's from that very deep listening to what my purpose is, and how and what I think Philadelphia's artists and audiences might find very special and exciting. So it's not necessarily that stumbling. There is that movement, and what I'm saying is, like, sometimes I'm going on the hero's journey. I'm going to go up to Ithaca today. So that's not it. I think there's the element, I'm going to go to the Save-A-Lot, in Germantown, and literally every time I go there, I get a lesson for my soul. I'm serious, just from listening to people and getting on that wavelength that is deep and spiritual and artistic. And, you know, I didn't get it from running around and seeing tons of theater. I've learned it by sitting home and listening and learning who my creative parents are, you know, so yeah.
That makes perfect. Yeah,
Mm.
that makes perfect sense. Well, Sonya Aronowitz, thank you so very
Thank
much. We've
you.
had so many pieces of these conversations on
Yeah.
park benches around the city for years, and it's been really fun to sort of dig a little bit deeper into um, so much of what drives the work that you do. And we're very thankful that you're here for all the artists in Philadelphia who whose names need to be in lights. That's pretty much. So I'm wishing you the
Yeah,
very
thank you.
best of years to come. I've no doubt that you won't merge and meld these wonderful stumbling happenstances and creative parents into something beautiful and wonderful. So thank you very
Yeah.
much for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Tina. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
And thanks to everyone joining us this evening. I do hope you'll join us next Saturday. What is that? January the 9th. And Christopher Munden, who is the editor of the Arts and Culture and Theater journal Findy here in Philadelphia. We'll talk to Chris about his love of as a writer and as an editor and as a person who really is a publication that is so very important to independent artists here in Philadelphia and around the country, and also his love of sports and as a founder of the Kensington Soccer Club. So we're going to talk to him about the ways in which theater and writing and soccer and sports all merge there together. I hope you'll be with us. And thanks so much for joining us today. Just wishing you a very safe and a very I'm going to say happy and comfortable, if that's what's in the cards for you, week ahead. Thanks for joining us.